Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session titled The Role of Existential Hope in Shaping Our Future with Beatrice Erkers. I'm Harrison, and I'll be the MC for this session. Following Beatrice's presentation, we'll move on to a live Q&A where Beatrice will respond to any questions that you may have. You can submit questions through the swap card live discussion feature. You'll be able to see that there is both a regular chat and a tab for questions. Then after 45 minutes, we'll bring this session to an end. Beatrice Erkers works for the Foresight Institute, a non-profit that works to advance technology for good. At Foresight, Beatrice manages the Existential Hope program, encouraging thoughtful discussion on technology's role in society. Beatrice also co-hosts the Existential Hope podcast and oversees its platform, fostering a space for collaborative exploration and ideas. Her work is centered around connecting people and ideas to shape a positive technological future. So without further ado, let's introduce Beatrice. And Beatrice, if you would like to take it away.
I will. Thank you so much, Harrison, for the introduction. Great. Well, I can't see anyone if you're there, but I've heard that you're there, so that's very nice. So thank you for coming. My name is Beatrice, and yeah, I work at the Foresight Institute. And today's talk is going to be focusing on the work that we do on existential hope, as we call it. So I'll just start by telling you a little bit about the Foresight Institute. So the Foresight Institute is founded in 1986. It's a nonprofit that works to advance technology for the long-term benefit of life. It has kind of a funny history. So it's Eric Drexler, the co-founder, wrote this book called Engines of Creation. And there was this book that sort of painted out this possibility of a very highly technological positive future that we could have. And this was sort of the founding vision of the Foresight Institute. And so there was a lot of interest in this book. And so together with Christine Peterson, he co-founded the Foresight Institute. And so a few of our key achievements are we hosted the first nanotech conference. We ran the first prediction market, which was literally people posting letters to our office in the Bay in the 90s. So not like Metaculous or anything today. It was very, very analog. We introduced the concept of biostasis to the public and predicted 2 Nobel Prize laureates with our Feynman Prize. One of them, David Baker, who won this year actually in chemistry. And so today, Foresight still exists, and it's kind of a Schelling point for scientists and technologists that work to create these highly technological futures that Drexler originally imagined in his book. And so these are the specific focus areas that we're focusing on. We focus on molecular machines, so that's nanotechnology, biotech and health extension, intelligent cooperation, which is computation and cryptography and so on, and where a lot of our work on AI comes in, space, neurotech, and then there's existential hope, which I will be telling you more about today. And also the question often comes up, well, okay, so what do you actually do in these fields? Well, we invest in talent, we have a fellowship, we have grants, we do field building, we have workshops, seminars, etc. We have virtual seminar group actually, so this, where sort of anyone wherever you are in the world can apply. So if you're someone who maybe lives in a country where you don't have access to a lot of top-notch researchers or so in your field, I would highly encourage you to maybe apply to our seminar groups, because then you'll have access to the sort of Bay Area community around biotechnology or whatever it is. So yeah. And then we also do basically mapping. So thinking about what technologies do we want to work on, how do we get there? For example, we do that with tech trees, where I don't know if anyone has played the game Civilization, but it's we think about, okay, this technology, what's the end game of this technology? For example, with nanotech, it's to be able to create anything from an atomic level. And then, okay, so what are the like challenges to getting there? What are like the research bottlenecks to getting there, and so on? And what are the risks, and how do we avoid the risks? And so that's what we do with our tech trees. And then there's Existential Hope program, which yeah, I'll be telling you more about now. So yeah, I'll tell you a bit about like what is the role of existential hope in our work, and to maybe explore if it could be relevant to others as well. So yeah, like why even discuss existential hope? I think the main reason for bringing it up is that existential risk, or like working to decrease existential risk, I think isn't the only way that we can work to shape the long-term future. And so I also think that like isn't everyone to some extent working on creating a better future? I would say yes. And so I would say roughly when I speak about like existential hope like this, it's more about like if we try to like think big for positive futures, like what if we think about what do we really want the future to be? That's more like what I mean, not just yes, it would be great to have a slightly better future tomorrow than we have today. So thinking like vision setting, I guess. And then I also think that there's an important point here about like the framing and the narrative of the work that we do on shaping the future. So it's not just about like what is the actual work that you're doing, but also like how do we talk about the work that we're doing. And so here I think existential hope is an interesting concept, just because I think you'll attract a different audience based on how you talk about something, and you may be able to like generate more excitement if you talk about something in a certain way. And I'll get more into like the specifics of that soon. But before that, I'll just like introduce like 3 core concepts that often come up, or like that I feel are the ones that are being mostly used in this context. So one of them is existential hope, like the one that I've been talking about now. But to be honest, I think that's mostly us at Foresight that use this concept of existential hope. So I don't know if you've ever gone on like the EA forum or something and you want to read about positive futures, I would recommend like existential hope. You can see like a few things maybe written on, but there's also some interesting stuff written on like utopias, and like different types of utopias, like weirdtopia, funtopia, protopia, paritotopia. There's a lot of like these types of concepts. And then positive trajectory changes is also a concept that comes up, I think, and is being used when discussing like how do we actively think about like a larger scale positive future. And this isn't, I don't mean that this is an exhaustive list, basically. It's more like these are the 3 concepts that I see come up most often, or like being most frequently used. So briefly, utopia, it's a term coined by Sir Thomas More in his book called Utopia. And it literally means like no place, like it doesn't exist. But yeah, I mentioned a few of these concepts already, like protopia, where you're like prototype towards the future is the idea of protopia. Weirdtopia, I think that comes from an Ilya Sergakowski post of like the future is going to be weird. Like if we think about someone from the Middle Ages coming to the future today, they could not comprehend like what are cars, like what are all these weird things, and that's like what the future is going to be like to us. And it's a useful concept, I think, in actually being able to think like pretty boldly about what the future could be, I think, because you're less tied to like what the context that we grew up in, and like the futures that we imagine are probably pretty similar to our context, basically. But the future could be really, really weird, and it doesn't necessarily have to be bad, basically. And then there's the phrase positive trajectory change. So that's Nick Beckstead, who I think it was in his PhD thesis. He wrote about this idea of we could work to, you know, there's a like trajectory of civilization, or yeah, and then we can work to like steer that trajectory. And so he speaks about like advancements, like we can try to make progress happen sooner, like accelerating progress, speed ups, gains, and enhancements. Like, yeah, there's a few different things I would recommend. Well, Nick Bextor's paper on it, but also Toby Ord's paper recently, where he goes through the different like advancements, speed ups, gains, enhancements, and breaks it down. And then there's existential hope. I think in terms of how they're being used, my sense is that utopia is the one that people are more like having fun with throwing out there. It's kind of like the word utopia, I think in some contexts has kind of a bad rep, or like it doesn't always ring positive to people. I think a lot of people think about when they hear the word utopia as something that's like it's not even interesting to talk about because it's just like unrealistic, or it has these like negative connotations of maybe historical challenges of people that have tried to realize the utopia in very authoritarian ways. But the way that I see it mostly used today is more like, you know, experimenting with these like concepts of different positive futures. And positive trajectory change, my sense is that is something that is being used more academically. Like I said, the paper comes from the concept comes from Becksted's thesis. I've seen, I think, Toby Ord use it, and I've seen Will McCaskill use it in his like What We Owe the Future. So I think that seems to come like being more used by like the academic crowd. And then there's the existential hope one, which we're going to dive a bit deeper into. But yeah, I think it's mostly like us at the Foresight Institute that uses it now. But I think that my sense for the concept of existential hope is that it's, I guess it's my favorite for the purposes that we are using it for, because people generally understand pretty quickly, like roughly what it's about. I don't think that, you know, it can be interpreted in many ways, I guess, but roughly they understand like, oh, it's about some sort of like large scale positive future thinking here. And then also it's better for like engaging people. It's like a bit more exciting sounding than like positive trajectory change. So the concept of existential hope comes from a paper written by Toby Ord and Owen Cotton Barrett, where they talk about the paper is named Existential Risk and Existential Hope. And it basically tries to just define these concepts. And the way that we use it at Foresight is basically, you know, roughly that it's a lens to identify and pursue optimistic, high-value futures. So the way that Toby Ord and Owen Cotton Barrett uses it is like it's more academic the way that they used it, because they're saying like, oh, an example of existential hope is the creation of life to begin with, which is obviously like a very high bar for what constitutes like a positive event. I think at Foresight, we use it more broadly, like I said, to like more excite people in general. And it can be something like, oh, if we were able to, have like nanotechnology or like atomically precise manufacturing, that would be a eucatastrophe event to us. Like a eucatastrophe is something the opposite of a catastrophe. So it's something that once it happens, there's like much more value in the world. And so what I'm trying to say is like we use it pretty freely, and like I would say like broadly speaking about a very positive future, and not like very academically it has to be this specific type of event. What is existential hope? Well, existential risk, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Basically, existential risk is this idea that something threatens to destroy the long-term potential of life. And this is the definition that Ord and Barrett uses in their paper. And so then there's this idea of existential hope, or X-hope, as we often call it, where it's about trying to identify something which would be very good for the expected future value of the world, and then working to achieve that. And so these are like, I think, my two favorite quotes from this paper, where it says like, armed with this concept, we can draw a new lesson. Just as we should strive to avoid existential catastrophes, we should also seek out existential eucatastrophes. So basically this idea of a eucatastrophe, like I said, it's the opposite of a catastrophe. So like what can we do to make a very positive event come true? And then also like we think this captures a natural class of events and what may be an important one. We hope that having a label for the concept may help others to make better judgments about what courses to pursue. And I think this is a really important point, just because I think that having a label or like having language for something will help us talk about it. You know, very, very simply put, if we have a label, like we have this idea now of existential hope, it just like helps create more of a field around it, and like being able to, you know, even just like start to envision it and like start a conversation around it. So this is like from basically a post on the EA forum I wrote, co-wrote a year or so ago, where we were talking about like trying to break down like why existential hope, or like is there any value in exploring this concept? Like, should we be paying more attention to this concept? And these are a few of the like pros that we landed on, which one of them is just like we believe that there's a very strong bias toward negative futures right now if you look at the just like general cultural zeitgeist. So meaning like if you look at a sci-fi movie, it's generally not focused on like, oh, this amazing utopian future that we could have, but it's more like, oh, we could live in a super scary surveillance state or something like that. Or like Black Mirror, you know, it's not like we're not seeing like the positive ideas of what the future could be. And so that's like this is pretty strong bias in just our like pop culture. And we believe that like it's good to start thinking about, well, okay, what do we actually want? Maybe we should start thinking about that, just because like if you're trying to steer towards something, it's probably easier to know like at least roughly where you're going, because otherwise it's going to be really hard to get there. And then it's also good for just like generating ideas for new causes and interventions, similar to what I was saying earlier about the like paper. It's just like kind of good to have just even the idea that we could work towards creating or like increasing value, rather than like just avoiding downsides. I think there are a lot of things potentially, there could be a lot of things that we could do to like make the future better. And I'll say a few examples later. I also think that there's a really important point to be said about that we should be having this conversation now, basically, just because of the rapid advancements in AI, mainly. Like everything's happening so fast right now. I think there was a post by Holden Karnofsky that's saying basically this, like the future could be here sooner than we think. And so this point is like, well, we should start to think about what future we actually want, because I think this is a very like critical turning point, or like a very critical point in history, basically. And then there's the idea that this concept, I think, could potentially help attract more people to this type of work. I think there's like something to be said about like it can help bridge the gap between different communities, meaning like sometimes I've found, for example, I work with a lot of, you know, very like tech and science focused people, and they sometimes get very upset when you're like too focused on all the risks of their technologies, for example. And so then it's been very valuable to like have this concept of, well, we're working towards existential hope, so we're like really excited about the future, and we're excited about this like high-tech future, but we also like have this, because we want this, we also realize that there are like, it would be such a travesty not to like achieve it or to like lose everything. And so that's why we also have to like think about the risks. So then it's like we're like positive. Oh, I have to move a little here. It'll be dark. Yeah, it would be it can be useful basically, and like it's a very like peaceful term to come together around, I guess. And then another point that I think is really interesting is that it can help like increase this like emotional connection to the future, to like try to engage more people to work on these things. And I think that like my main example here is the transhumanist community, for example, are kind of the first people that started to really think about and work on existential risk were people that were like transhumanists, like Nick Bostrom or Anders Sandberg, I think are like really good examples of that, where they were thinking about like all the very like transhumanistic, super cool futures that they were super excited about. And then they started thinking about, oh my God, what happens if it doesn't happen? Or like, you know, there are all these like things that could happen so that we don't get that future. And then when you think about what you have to lose in that sense, that's what brought them to think about like existential risk and, oh, we should do something about that. A few cons. So why not work on existential hope potentially? I think it could be pretty easily argued that we should always prioritize work on avoiding existential risk. Like I always want to emphasize when I speak about existential hope that I don't mean like, oh, we should replace talking about existential risk with instead just talking about existential hope. It's more like a complement to that. But yeah, I think it could be said that like, oh, just the risk of losing everything is so large that that's the only thing we should focus on. There's also the potential that like work on increasing existential hope could have negative consequences. If, for example, a good example of this, I would say, is just if your idea of working on increasing existential hope is just like to speed up some technology and you just want to like make it happen as fast as possible and you don't think about the downsides that could have negative consequences. There's also like, I would really emphasize that this is very much an experiment still to us, and something that is pretty new. It's a new program for us. We only started like a few years ago, and no one has been working full time on it or anything. So maybe it doesn't work. Like maybe we don't really know. It's an experiment, and we'll see. Hopefully, in a few years, I'll be able to have more of an answer to that. And yeah, this was my point that I said before. I don't mean that we need to replace speaking about existential risk. I just mean it as like existential hope could be useful as a complementary addition. So a few examples of projects, because I understand that it can sound like kind of fluffy at this point, maybe. So a few examples of potential projects that one could do to work on existential hope maybe is like steering values, trying to expand the moral circle. I think it could be a really good example of like more like focusing on creating or like focusing on gaining value in that sense rather than like avoiding risk or downside. Speeding up progress, like I said, like with different technologies, I think is a really good example. And yeah, that's basically what Foresight is doing, I guess, so that's a good example, I think. I'll just end on like a brief little point, like of what we're actually doing more in the Existential Hope program, or like what's coming up next year for us, and where people could potentially like engage, I guess. So the thing that we've done so far and like experimented with that I think has been most successful, other than just like talking about the concept and getting people to like think about what futures they want, is world building. And so this has been something that, so this is what we do in the Existential Hope program, I should say, like education and outreach. Like we have our platform, existentialhope.com. We have a podcast where we invite thinkers and leaders to talk about what futures they want, like what are they excited about, actually. There's a world building course that we're launching next year that anyone, wherever they are in the world, can do. And I'll tell you a little bit more about world building just after this slide. We have a newsletter. We are going to launch a prize next year. It'll be an Existential Hope meme prize, which I can maybe answer questions about it later if you have any. And then there's also, so that's more like the like, spreading the meme, I guess. And then the second part is just like getting down to work or like, taking action. So like one of the other things that we did this year, for example, we had a hackathon on institutions for governing AI and like what institutions do we need for that. And not just to like, again, not just to like minimize risk, but also like to capture value, like what institutions do we need to capture the value of AI. And so for that, we had this workshop, and now like the top three of the teams or like the projects there are now being incubated as real world organizations. And so I think that's a great example of like how we can actually practically try to put this into like action. And then we also do like advanced world building, where we invite, it's more, we invite people that are experts in different fields to like, help us map out and like think about what we want to achieve in terms of the work that they do, and try to do like more advanced world building in that sense. So just briefly, like world building is this idea that if we build out a future, so say we build out year 2045 is the year that we've often used, where we envision like we have super advanced AI maybe, and things have gone well. So what does that look like? And then the idea is that you build out a world basically similar to like what a sci-fi author or a fantasy author would do, but you build it in reality. And the idea is that like when you build out a world like this, it's like there's intricate detail across many different like areas. Then that's really useful, because when something happens over here, like maybe something happens in the economy, well, how does that affect something over here, and like people's general well-being or something like that. And so it helps us like envision these type of what if scenarios, and it's basically good because it helps us embody a story and have like a level of familiarity that I think would otherwise be really hard to get. So in that sense, when you built out this scenario, you also like backcast basically and think about, okay, so what are the steps and challenges actually to getting there? Like, how do we get to this future? And so that's how it can also like inform what we do today, like the example that I had about the institutions that are now being incubated to govern AI. That's a great example of like, okay, if we want this future with AI, what are the challenges? What can we do now? So yeah, this our world building work is funded by the Future of Life Institute. And so I just think this quote is really good from Anthony Aguirre, who says like, world builds are inhabitable stories about the future that can warn, inspire, and help us think and decide. So I think that I just mentioned world building very briefly because that's in terms of the work that we do on Existential Hope, and like where we are currently in this like project is very much at this like early stage phase of like trying to even imagine and like get people to imagine and think about what futures we want. And so it's a good example of how we can start playing, I guess, with this concept, or like see what's useful. I do want to say that I don't at all want to say that we should say like, okay, in 1,000 years the world should look like this. I don't think that's how it works. And I don't think that's like the answer, or what I mean by, oh, we should have a vision to steer towards. It's more that I think this quote from Bostrom is very telling, in that he says like, what if the great apes had asked if they should evolve into Homo sapiens, and they would have said like, oh, we could have a lot of bananas if we became human, like. But that's obviously not like the goal for most people now. Is not like to have as many bananas as possible. And in the same way, it's probably really hard for us to imagine what people in 1,000 years from now would want or need. And so it's more like what I was saying about, well, now is a pretty crucial time in terms of steering the sort of vast capabilities of artificial intelligence. And so I think now is the time to start having a conversation, because it's good to have some sort of North Star to steer towards. Just because like if you don't know what you're trying to steer towards at all, you just end up steering away from things. And there could potentially be just a lot of value that is missed using that strategy. And so I'll end on this quote from Petrarch that I think is just a really, I love it when history sort of like just helps us see our current situation better. And so the quote goes like, "My fate is to live among varied and confusing storms. But for you, perhaps, if, as I hope and wish you will live long after me, there will follow a better age." And I would say that, like, I'm so happy that I was born in 1993 and not 1343 when Petrarch was walking around. And I think that our world is much better now. And so I think this idea of thinking about ourselves is like Petrarch and thinking about what future we could create. And like there's this letter from Utopia about Nick Bostrom, for example, where they're like there's these like creatures looking back on their ancestors that helped their utopia come to life. I think that maybe we're like somewhere in between. Maybe we're the ones in between that can like we can help build that utopian future the way that I'm sure like Petrarch and his ancestors help build this future that we're in right now, or this great world. If you have like if you're interested in like the concept more, I would say that this is like the best source. It's a post on the forum that I co-wrote, and yeah, it basically goes over like this concept, which is very like new and experimental, like I said. Yeah, and yeah, this is my contact info if you have any questions or anything. But that's it for me for now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Beatrice. That was fantastic. So I'm going to dive straight into some of the questions that people have been asking in the chat. For anyone whose questions we don't get to, we do have an office hours session directly afterwards, just for those who want to attend that. First question we have is from Louis Bergy. I may not be pronouncing that right. If there are, what are the limits of technology to cause good or complete utopia?
Wait, sorry, if there are?
Um, if there are limits, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll rephrase it a bit. If there are limits to it, what are the limits of technology to cause a good or a complete utopia?
Ah. Um, well, I think there's a really interesting concept, I think, again, by like Nick Bostrom. I feel like he has said everything that there is on this kind of stuff. There's this concept of technological maturity that I think is really interesting. I don't know if anyone has read his latest book, Deep Utopia, where he that basically like starts in that we are like the starting point of the book is that we have reached technological maturity, meaning like all technologies are as developed as they can be. Basically, like we've reached the limits of physics in that sense. So to that extent, pretty limitless. Like if you ask like I think there's a quote by David Deutsch that's like anything is possible that is physically possible, basically. So in that sense, I'm sure there's like huge potential in terms of creating a really, amazing utopias using technology. If you want more specific ideas, I do think like that the technologies that Foresight works on is a good place to start. Like imagine we could actually create everything we wanted to from just like atom by atom. Like that's the idea of nanotech and molecular manufacturing. It's just like the ideas are pretty limitless in terms of what you could do, because you could create whatever medicine anyone needed to, or like you could I think just like environmentally you could build anything you needed to, or like you reused everything because you could reuse the atoms. Like it's just like the climate possibilities of it as well would be just amazing and very, very needed, I think. So yeah, it's like really limitless actually if you start to go there basically in your mind. Yeah, I hope that.
Great. Pardon me. The next question is from Also from Louis as well. What technology could be used to increase altruistic tendencies of humans or other moral agents? So, compassion, independent happiness, critical thinking, etc.
That's a very fun question. I one of the things that I've been thinking about more lately is like the potential capabilities of neurotechnology. Like, we are our brains to a very large extent, or like we are, yeah, it very much shapes us. And so I think actually one of the things that come up often when we do world building, like if you want to kind of like summarize one of the main challenges always to like achieving this like amazing world that we're envisioning is like human coordination, or like human coordination, and like human nature to some extent, because it's hard. It's like really hard to communicate even with each other, and so neurotechnology could be interesting in the sense that like if we didn't, for example, have to use, we weren't so bound by a language in how we communicate. But we could actually maybe have like direct brain to brain telepathy type of communication. Maybe we could communicate. It could still be in language, maybe, but if you just were able to communicate much faster, you could maybe communicate much more nuance. Like I think a lot of like confusion comes from like not understanding each other, or like not having enough context or information about things. So that's one thing. I think neurotechnology could be really interesting in that sense. And also like if you imagine like there's some neurotech stuff now that like you can put on a helmet or like a pair of glasses and stuff, and it makes you feel a certain way. Like maybe I don't think the things that they can make you feel right now are very exciting, because it's like, oh, it can make you feel like nausea. Okay, that's not very fun. But imagine that you could feel what someone else is feeling or like experiencing, that you would probably have much more empathy for them. Or imagine you're able to communicate with animals better. I think like that would be so amazing, because maybe people would have more compassion, hopefully, for animals then. So yeah, I think neurotechnology is a really, really interesting one in that sense. And then another one, I guess, is hopefully to some extent AI, like because AI could, I think, in like the best case scenarios, could just like help us coordinate better. Like a lot of coordination is just really hard, and especially if we're like limited by the fact that we're like humans with limited time and energy and resources and so on. If we had this like yeah, if we had this, maybe it could be an AGI that's much smarter than us that could help us just like organize things in a better way and coordinate better. That would be great if they had like oversight and helped with that. Or just like even more like down to earth thinking of like, oh, well, it would be great, or it is great if we have like really secure technology where we can have like I blank on what it's called now, but like basically contracts and things that help you coordinate with people. You don't have to necessarily like be, when you sign a contract with someone these days, maybe you want to like make sure you know the person, and like to know that you can actually really trust this contract. But if you have like more cryptographically good and sane contracts, that you could collaborate more like freely across the world. Like I think crypto is actually a really good example of that. Like having a blockchain where you can see everything that's been transacted. That's a good collaboration for technology that hopefully if we're like able to communicate and do those types of collaborate, basically just like collaborate better. I think that could be also really interesting.
Great. And we also have a question from one of our volunteers, Angel Milev. He says, do you have any tips on effective communication regarding existential hope? So like promoting the concept to a wider audience without appearing to make it too complicated or appearing overly simplistic.
Yeah. Good question. I think everything I say on this should be seen as like more anecdotal than I have developed a very like clear theory on this. It's more like my personal experiences. I do think actually like people, if you just like talk about or like lift the phrase existential hope, I find that people often like, what like it's just like the idea, I think, creates images in their head, and you can sort of bounce with them from that in terms of like yeah, what, just if you dare start to think about what a positive future could be, yeah, I don't know, you just take it from there. But in terms of more concretely, I think one of the ways that we often do is like you can contrast it against something else. So like in the paper originally, like you contrast it against existential risk, because then it's like that helps in yeah, just like creating people understand a bit more what it is. I think another thing that is we've contrasted it against that has been really useful, I think, is this we often talk about going from existential angst to existential hope, because I think existential angst is like a concept that I think if you've read like existentialist philosophy or something like that, it's a concept that many are, I think, very familiar with. And I think actually when I was talking about like how there's a bias towards negativity, I do think that like there's a huge amount of just existential angst in the world. And so the idea of like, yeah, well, contrasting it against existential angst, I think is also interesting. And then I think speaking about specific things, like kind of what the question of like, okay, you know, to make it less fluffy, basically, because it does sound really fluffy if you're just like, oh, existential hope and hope is good and all of these things. So like coming with concrete examples, I think is also really good. And I think especially if there's like something that, for example, different people get excited about different things. So if you could like, my main thing, for example, is like being able to communicate with animals is like kind of the thing that makes me the most excited. So I like talking about that. I think if you have something that you're like passionate about, that helps. Or like if you can target what that person is interested in or passionate about. Like, for example, if they were about climate change, like, okay, imagine a world where we manage really well with climate. Maybe we could like affect it in like whatever way we want. You know, that's another way, I think. And then yeah, I'm sure there's more, but I'll try to think about it if I come up with anything else.
Great. And I think we've got time for one more question, which you perfectly led us into there because you said you mentioned this bias towards negativity. And so Harisiman's question is when doom sells, how do we align people with hope?
Yeah. Um, so everyone always says that, and it's true, obviously. Like when whenever I talk about this, I at conferences and stuff, it's always like, oh, we need to change the like you know, pop culture, like yeah, doom sells. It's we don't have a choice here, basically. And I think that obviously like that's true, like to some extent. And
Everyone always says that, and it's
uh, and you know, that can be useful. Like we can, fear can be a powerful driver as well, I guess. Like we can use that sometimes. But I do think that like, I don't know, like maybe I'm biased here because I just think that it's to some extent overestimated, because it's not necessarily like doom. It's like conflict. And I think you know, oftentimes, and that has been said about like Holden Karnowski had that post about like, well, why are utopias always kind of like boring? Like either they're eerie, like Brave New World, so, like it doesn't feel right because it feels too like organized, or they're boring because it's like nothing is happening. But I think like if you think about looking at a TV show, like an American TV show like Friends, those are just people like hanging out. I think to me that's kind of a utopia. Like they don't seem to have to worry about that much. Their like main challenges in life are like love issues. And like I would be so excited. Like for example, when I want to relax from work, I'll read like chick lit. I'll, you know, just like love stories. And that's not, you know, I would like, why doesn't anyone write like sci-fi chick lit, basically? To me, that's like enough conflict, and we don't have to be without that. I think that could actually sell quite well. Like love, obviously, it seems to be something that sells, and I don't think that, the sort of infinite challenges of like love stories, I'm sure could be brought into utopias as well. Yeah. So to some extent, I think maybe it's overestimated.
Brilliant. We only have a few minutes left, so that I think that concludes this session for today. Thank you everyone for coming to this, and a reminder that Beatrice will be available in the office hour session directly afterwards, but that is in Zoom. So go and find the link to that in the swap card page. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much.